Diversity of Life 1.3, Life in Different Environments. Okay, by now we should have a split screen with the notebook sheet called Life in Different Environments. Make sure you have your tools and Notability ready to go. A couple things I want to point out as you summarize the results of the last couple days. In the next part, you're going to get first what the three liquids were. So I want you to first write down what the three liquids were. Liquid 1 goes here, liquid 2 goes here, liquid 3 goes here. The next thing that you're going to receive are the names of the materials, the dry materials that were in the baggie at the very beginning. You're going to list those materials here and then just repeat 3 times for liquid 2 and 3. Remember, we all use the same dry materials. And then finally, you will wait until the next slide to add what evidence you have of life or what you observed based on our discussion. All right, let's get started. Liquid 1, salt water. Liquid 2, sugar water. Liquid 3, plain tap water. The materials were A, red sand, B, yeast, C, polyacrylate crystals, also known as diaper polymer, also known as Orbeez, D, radish seeds, and E, brine shrimp eggs, also known as sea monkeys. As you fill in the results inside your data table there on the right, I want you to consider the next few questions very carefully. Please pause on each of these questions as you fill out your data table and give yourself time to reflect and write. The first thing I want you to consider is, are there any patterns in the data? And what do the patterns tell you? Number 2, think about cause and effect relationships. How does a change in the environment affect organisms? Number 3, how many of the materials appeared to be alive when you first observed them in the bags? How many of the materials appear to be alive now, 2 days after they were placed in the vials with the liquids? How does environment affect organisms? Discussing the environments for a minute. Some of the organisms did not show evidence of life in some of the conditions. For example, the seeds didn't sprout in salt water, but they did in fresh water. And the brine shrimp didn't do well in plain water or sugar water, but thrived in salt water. Is there anything that we can conclude from our results that living organisms need? Remember, we already have written down that living things need water. They need energy. What else do they need in order to thrive? Remember how we said earlier that we need more vocabulary to describe some of the cards that we had in our list? We talked about how living things need to show all the characteristics of life, like needing food, water, growth, responding to the environment. The yeast did all those things. Living things are organisms. Remember the cacti. The cacti is living and it's an organism. Read the next part with me. Parts of living organisms like arms, tails, and leaves are also alive. So if I were to cut off one of the arms of this cactus, it would be considered a living thing. But would the cactus arm be considered an organism? The answer is no. Organisms must be able to live alone and survive independently. This cactus arm would be alive for a while, and then it would die. Here's another example of an organism. This organism is an independent living thing, but the baby's arms, legs, and ears are living, but not organisms by themselves. They cannot survive alone. So, two new words. Organisms are living things that can survive alone, and parts of organisms are living. Let's go back to the apple here. The apple fell from a tree. The tree was the organism. The apple fell from it. The apple's alive right now. It's nice and red and not mushy. But I can't call the apple an organism because it fell from the organism. An apple is alive, but not an organism. Okay, let's talk about the seeds inside. Because we could argue that the seeds inside are potential organisms. But what's happening right now is they're inactive. Or, number one, things that are alive but inactive are dormant. So the seeds inside this apple are dormant right now. And what they're going to need is the right conditions. Just like the brine shrimp needed the right conditions of salt water to hatch, or that the yeast needed sugar water to begin eating the sugar and creating a gas waste. The seeds inside this apple are lying dormant. So what advantage would an organism have by going dormant? Well, it's waiting for the right conditions, and it can lie dormant for quite a while before dying. Speaking of death, things that are alive but no longer are called dead. So, for example, we all know this rocking horse. It looks like it's made of wood, and wood came from a tree. But the tree was cut down and processed and created into this rocking horse. So we can say that the parts of the rocking horse are dead. Okay, it is not a living thing. The rocking horse cannot survive on its own. It's not an organism. But its parts are dead because it's made of wood. So, again, dead is different from, say, non-living. This tornado is sure tricky because it has some of the characteristics of life. For example, typically tornadoes need to have some sort of water or storm to form. So there we go, just like a living thing. They need the right conditions to grow. So growing is a condition of life. But the tornado does not have all the characteristics of life. Many, many things on this earth have some of the characteristics or nearly all the characteristics of life, say like a robot. But without all of them, we cannot categorize them as organisms or living things. Let's consider other living/non-living cards. How does what you have learned influence your decisions? Number one, what about camphor? Remember this? The mystery substance that we put in the water at the very beginning of this unit is called camphor. And camphor is a type of crystal. Camphor did react when I put it into water. It began to dissolve. And the dissolving looked like funny little swimming movements. Some of us felt like The camphor was shooting around looking for food or for mates. It was swimming right, left, erratically like a fish would. So, what does movement have to do when determining whether something is alive or not? Should I include movement in it as a characteristic of life? That one's a tricky one. For example, your kelp in the card will move with the waves, but the kelp will not pick itself up and move to a different location. Or the apple will move to the ground because of gravity. Should I include movement as a characteristic of life? What do you think? It's time to summarize our findings of the last 2 weeks. These are the 3 documents in which you'll need to access. The first one's from lesson 1.1. The focus question was, how do you know if something's alive? In your quick write for day 1, you wrote down all the things from your past that you could recall were characteristics of life. I would like for you to not cross off anything you first thought. I would like for you to add what you now think. For example, we can add that living things respond to change, or living things create waste, like the yeast, or living things need water, living things need energy. These are things that we've collected over the week and over last week that you can add to your quick write now. Secondly, go back to your living, non-living card sort that you did by yourself before you took the survey. What changes would you like to make? Make your changes in red and leave your original answers so that I can see how your thinking has evolved. And finally, life in different environments was finished today with evidence of life that you observed in the different liquids within the vials. Please consolidate these, put them on the same notability document, and submit them when you click next. Thank you, and see you tomorrow.